The invitation sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, elegant cream cardstock with gold embossing that caught the morning light. Sarah Mitchell stared at it, her coffee growing cold in her hand, reading the names over and over again, as if repetition might change what her eyes were seeing. Mr. Robert Mitchell and guest. Not Mr. and Mrs. Robert Mitchell. Not Robert and Sarah Mitchell. Just Robert Mitchell and guest. As if 22 years of marriage had been erased with the stroke of a pen, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenient footnote in her own husband's life story. Hey there, beautiful souls. I'm Tina, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. You know, sometimes life throws us curveballs that we never see coming, and today I'm bringing you a story that will absolutely shake you to your core. This is about a woman who discovered the most devastating betrayal, but what her husband didn't know was that she held all the cards. I'm talking about power, secrets, and a revelation that will leave you speechless. Trust me, you need to stick around until the very end, because the twist in this story is something you'll never forget. And hey, if you're loving this already, just tap that like button and subscribe, because I've got so many more incredible stories coming your way. Now, let me tell you what happened to Sarah. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the invitation to her brother-in-law Thomas's wedding, scheduled for the first weekend of June at the Grand Meridian Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in Boston. She and Robert had been talking about this wedding for months, ever since Thomas had announced his engagement to Catherine last Christmas. Sarah had even helped Catherine choose her wedding dress, spending an entire Saturday afternoon at bridal boutiques in downtown Boston, offering advice and sharing stories about her own wedding day more than 2 decades ago. Catherine had been so sweet, so grateful, calling Sarah the sister she never had, promising that Sarah would have a place of honor at the wedding. And now this invitation, this cold, impersonal piece of paper that relegated Sarah to the status of nobody, of nothing, of a woman whose existence could be acknowledged with a single word: guest. The apartment around her felt suddenly unfamiliar, as if she were seeing it through new eyes, eyes that recognized the truth she had been avoiding for months now. The distance between her and Robert had grown so gradually that she hadn't noticed it happening, like the slow retreat of a tide that leaves you stranded on an empty beach before you realize the water is gone. He came home later and later from work, always with reasonable explanations, always with that apologetic smile that had once melted her heart, but now felt rehearsed, mechanical, empty of any real warmth. Their conversations had become transactional, limited to logistics and schedules, devoid of the intimate details and shared dreams that had once bound them together. When was the last time they had really talked, really connected, really looked into each other's eyes and seen each other as human beings rather than as obstacles to navigate around? Sarah set down her coffee cup and picked up her phone, her fingers moving almost of their own accord as she typed a message to Catherine. Hey Kate, got the invitation today. Just wanted to confirm the details. Looking forward to celebrating with you both. She kept it light, casual, giving nothing away of the storm brewing inside her chest. The response came back within minutes, and Sarah's stomach dropped as she read the words on her screen. Sarah, I'm so confused. Robert told us 3 weeks ago that you couldn't make it because of work commitments. He said you were organizing some major corporate retreat that same weekend and couldn't get out of it. Thomas and I were so disappointed, but we understood. Your career is so demanding. The phone slipped from Sarah's fingers and clattered onto the marble countertop. Work commitments, a corporate retreat. Lies, all lies, woven so smoothly that even Catherine, sweet and trusting Catherine, had believed them without question. Sarah's mind raced backward, scanning through recent conversations, searching for any mention Robert might have made about her missing the wedding, any hint that he had been planning this deception. There was nothing. He had looked her in the eye every single day, kissed her goodbye every morning, and never once mentioned that he had written her out of his family's most important celebration. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the Boston skyline, at the glass and steel towers that stretched toward the gray spring sky, at the city where she had built her entire adult life. She had moved here 23 years ago, fresh out of Cornell University with her degree in hospitality management and a heart full of dreams that seemed impossibly big and impossibly distant. Her first job had been as an assistant manager at a mid-range hotel in Cambridge, working 16-hour days for a salary that barely covered her rent in a tiny studio apartment she shared with 2 roommates. But Sarah had never minded the hard work, had never resented the long hours, because she could see her future taking shape with every challenge she overcame, every crisis she navigated, every guest she transformed from angry to satisfied. That was where she had met Robert Mitchell, at a corporate networking event hosted at the hotel where she worked. He had been 28 years old, confident and charming in his perfectly tailored suit, working as a sales representative for a pharmaceutical company. He had approached her at the bar, introduced himself with that devastating smile, and within 5 minutes had her laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Their courtship had been whirlwind and romantic, full of spontaneous weekend trips and handwritten love letters and promises whispered in the dark. Robert had seemed so proud of her ambitions back then, so supportive of her dreams, always encouraging her to reach higher, to demand more, to never settle for anything less than everything she deserved. They had married a year later in a small ceremony at a historic chapel in Beacon Hill, surrounded by close friends and family, with Sarah's grandmother's diamond ring on her finger and Robert's promises echoing in her ears. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. Words that had seemed so solid, so permanent, so unbreakable. Words that now felt like they were written in sand, easily washed away by the first wave of difficulty or disappointment. The early years of their marriage had been good, genuinely good, filled with the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes from building a life together from scratch. They had rented a small apartment in Jamaica Plain, furnished it with second-hand furniture and dreams, spent their weekends exploring the city and planning their future. Sarah had continued climbing the ladder in hotel management, moving from assistant manager to operations manager to director of guest services, each promotion bringing more responsibility and more satisfaction. Robert had supported her through all of it, or so she had thought. He had celebrated her victories, consoled her through her setbacks, held her hand through the difficult decisions that came with leadership. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. Sarah couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, couldn't identify the specific turning point, but looking back now she could see the pattern emerging like a photograph slowly developing in a darkroom. It had started subtly, with small comments disguised as jokes, little digs wrapped in laughter. "Another late night at the office, honey? I'm starting to forget what you look like." Or, "The guys at work asked if my wife actually exists or if I made her up." At first, Sarah had laughed along, had reassured him, had tried to balance her career with his need for attention. She had started coming home earlier when she could, had made a point of planning date nights and weekend getaways, had done everything possible to show Robert that he mattered, that their marriage mattered, that she wasn't choosing work over him. But it had never been enough. The comments had continued, growing sharper, more pointed, less disguised as humor. And then had come the comments from Robert's family, particularly from his mother Dorothy, a woman who had very firm opinions about a wife's proper place and had never been shy about sharing them. Dorothy Mitchell had been a homemaker her entire adult life, had devoted herself completely to her husband and children, and she viewed Sarah's career ambitions with barely concealed disapproval. "A woman should be home when her husband comes home from work," Dorothy had said more than once, her lips pressed into a thin line of judgment. "That's what marriage means. That's what commitment looks like. These modern women with their careers and their independence, they don't understand that a man needs to feel like a man, needs to feel like the provider, the protector, the head of his household." Sarah had tried to brush off Dorothy's comments, had tried to remind herself that the older woman came from a different generation, had different values, had lived a different kind of life. But the words had still stung, had still planted seeds of doubt in her mind, had still made her wonder if maybe she was doing something wrong, if maybe her ambitions were somehow selfish or destructive or incompatible with being a good wife. And Robert had never defended her, had never stood up to his mother, had never told Dorothy that Sarah's career was valuable and important and something to be celebrated rather than criticized. Instead, he had remained silent, had let his mother's words hang in the air like poison, had tacitly agreed through his silence that maybe Dorothy had a point, Maybe Sarah really was neglecting her duties. Maybe a good wife would have made different choices. 10 years into their marriage, Sarah had received the opportunity of a lifetime. The Grand Meridian Hotel, a historic 5-star property in downtown Boston that had been struggling under mismanagement, had been put up for sale. The building itself was magnificent, a Gilded Age masterpiece with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers and the kind of old-world elegance that money couldn't buy. But years of neglect and poor decision-making had tarnished its reputation, driven away its high-end clientele, left it hemorrhaging money and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Sarah had seen potential where others saw only problems, had envisioned what the property could become with the right leadership and the right investment and the right vision. Her grandmother had passed away that same year, leaving Sarah a substantial inheritance that her grandmother had accumulated through decades of careful saving and wise investing. The old woman had been a teacher her entire life, had lived modestly and frugally, had squirreled away every spare penny with the explicit intention of giving her granddaughters the opportunities she herself had never had. "Use this money to build something beautiful," her grandmother had written in a letter left with her will. "Don't let anyone tell you that your dreams are too big or that you should settle for less than everything you want. Make me proud, my darling girl. Show the world what you're capable of." Sarah had taken that inheritance, had combined it with her own savings and a substantial bank loan, and had made an offer on the Grand Meridian Hotel. The negotiations had been grueling, the due diligence had been exhausting, the paperwork had been overwhelming. But Sarah had persevered, had fought for every clause and every term, had refused to back down or compromise on her vision. And when the deal had finally closed, when the keys had been placed in her hand, when she had walked through those grand doors as the owner rather than just another employee, Sarah had felt a sense of accomplishment and purpose that exceeded anything she had ever experienced before. You know what, beautiful souls? I need to pause here for just a moment because I can already feel the emotion rising in this story, and I know you can feel it too. This woman poured her heart into building something extraordinary, and what she's about to discover will break your heart before it puts it back together in the most unexpected way. If you're feeling this story, if it's touching something deep inside you, would you do me a huge favor? Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever felt undervalued or overlooked by someone you loved. Your stories matter to me. Your voices matter. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button because we're building a community here. A family of people who understand that life is complicated and messy and beautiful all at the same time. Now let's get back to Sarah because you won't believe what happens next. The transformation of the Grand Meridian Hotel had consumed the next 5 years of Sarah's life. She had thrown herself into the project with single-minded determination, overseeing every detail of the renovation, from the restoration of the original marble floors to the updating of every guest room to modern luxury standards while maintaining the building's historic character. She had personally interviewed every member of the staff, from the concierge to the housekeeping team, building a culture of excellence and attention to detail that would become the hotel's hallmark. She had negotiated partnerships with the city's best restaurants, had created packages that appealed to both business travelers and tourists, had slowly, painstakingly rebuilt the hotel's reputation until the Grand Meridian was once again synonymous with luxury and sophistication. The work had been brutal, demanding every ounce of energy and creativity Sarah possessed. There had been nights when she slept on the couch in her office, too exhausted to drive home. There had been weeks when she saw Robert only in passing, ships in the night, exchanging brief updates and even briefer kisses before rushing off to their respective obligations. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew, moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing and impossible. But Sarah had kept pushing forward, kept believing in her vision, kept trusting that all the sacrifice would be worth it in the end. And it had been worth it. By the 3rd year of her ownership, the Grand Meridian had not only returned to profitability, but had exceeded all projections. By the 4th year, they were booked solid months in advance with a waiting list for their most exclusive suites. By the 5th year, The hotel had won numerous awards, including being named one of the top luxury hotels in New England by every major travel publication. Sarah had been featured in business magazines, had been invited to speak at hospitality conferences, had been courted by investors wanting to partner with her on additional properties. She had built something extraordinary, something that bore her stamp and reflected her vision, something that would last long beyond her own lifetime. But the success of the hotel had come with a price, and that price had been her marriage. Robert had grown increasingly distant as Sarah's star had risen, his early pride and support replaced by something darker and more complicated. He made snide comments about her being too busy for him, about the hotel being her real husband, about her caring more about strangers paying for rooms than about the man sharing her bed. Sarah had tried to explain that the demanding schedule was temporary, that once the hotel was fully established, she would have more time, that building something from the ground up required extraordinary effort, but that effort wouldn't last forever. But Robert hadn't wanted to hear her explanations, hadn't wanted to understand the complexity of what she was trying to accomplish, hadn't seemed capable of seeing past his own feelings of neglect and inadequacy. The real breaking point, though Sarah hadn't recognized it as such at the time, had come 2 years ago when the Grand Meridian had been named the top luxury hotel in Boston by the prestigious Luxury Travel Guide. The award had been a tremendous honor, the culmination of years of relentless work and dedication, and Sarah had been invited to accept the award at a glamorous ceremony attended by industry leaders from around the world. She had asked Robert to accompany her, had bought him a new tuxedo for the occasion, had been so excited to have him by her side as she accepted recognition for everything she had accomplished. But Robert had been sullen and withdrawn throughout the entire evening. He had barely spoken to the other guests, had refused to network or make conversation, had spent most of the cocktail hour standing in the corner, nursing a drink and checking his phone. When Sarah's name had been called and she had walked to the stage to accept her award, Robert had remained seated, his applause perfunctory and brief. And during her acceptance speech, when Sarah had thanked her team and her investors and the city of Boston for embracing the Grand Meridian, she had looked out at the audience and seen Robert's chair empty, seen him standing near the exit with his phone pressed to his ear, clearly having decided that whatever call he was taking was more important than his wife's moment of triumph. They had driven home in silence that night, the award sitting on the back seat between them like a wedge, like evidence of everything that had gone wrong in their marriage. Sarah had wanted to talk about it, had wanted to ask Robert why he couldn't be happy for her, why her success seemed to diminish him rather than elevate them both, why he insisted on treating her achievements as personal attacks rather than shared victories. But she had been afraid of the answer, afraid that speaking the truth aloud would make it real and undeniable, afraid that once certain words were spoken, they could never be taken back. So she had said nothing, had swallowed her hurt and disappointment, had told herself that Robert was just going through a difficult time, that he would come around eventually, that love could overcome anything if you just held on long enough and tried hard enough. She had been a fool, she realized now, staring at that wedding invitation on her kitchen counter. She had been willfully blind, deliberately naive, choosing to ignore the warning signs because acknowledging them would have required making choices she wasn't ready to make, facing truths she wasn't prepared to handle. Sarah picked up her phone again and called Catherine, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The phone rang 3 times before Catherine answered, her voice warm and cheerful. "Sarah, hi, did you get my message? I was so confused about the whole work thing." Sarah took a deep breath, steadying herself, choosing her words carefully. "Kate, I need you to be completely honest with me. What exactly did Robert tell you about why I couldn't come to the wedding?" There was a pause, and Sarah could almost hear Catherine's mental calculations, could sense the younger woman's reluctance to get involved in marital drama. "Sarah, I don't want to cause any problems between you and Robert." "Please," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know." Catherine sighed, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle, sympathetic, sad. "He said you were organizing a corporate retreat for some major clients that same weekend. He said it was a huge contract, potentially worth millions, and that you couldn't delegate it to anyone else. He said you were really torn about missing the wedding, but that your business had to come first. Thomas and I understood, Sarah. We know how demanding your career is. We weren't upset with you. The lies were so elaborate, so carefully constructed that Sarah felt sick listening to them repeated back to her. There was no corporate retreat. There was no major contract. There was nothing on her calendar that weekend except the wedding she had been looking forward to attending for months. Robert had invented an entire fictional scenario, had spun a web of deception so convincing that even people who knew Sarah well had accepted it without question. "Kate," Sarah said slowly, her mind working through the implications, "I need to ask you something else, and I need you to tell me the truth. Is Robert bringing someone to the wedding?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched out for so long that Sarah knew the answer before Catherine finally spoke. "Sarah, I really don't think I should be the one to tell you this." Those words, that careful deflection, confirmed Sarah's worst fears. "Please," she whispered. "I need to hear it from someone who cares about me." Catherine's voice, when it came, was thick with tears. Her name is Amber Collins. She's a marketing consultant who worked with Robert's company last year. He introduced her to Thomas and me at a dinner party 2 months ago, said she was a colleague and a good friend. We didn't think anything of it at the time, but then when Robert called to say you couldn't make the wedding, he mentioned that he would be bringing Amber as his +1 since he didn't want to attend alone. Sarah, I swear we didn't know anything was going on. We thought she was just a friend keeping him company since you couldn't be there. Sarah's hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles turned white. Amber Collins. She knew that name, had heard Robert mention it in passing over the past year. "Just a colleague," he had said whenever Amber's name came up in conversation. "Someone from the marketing firm we contracted for the new product launch." Sarah had met Amber exactly once, briefly, at a company holiday party Robert had dragged her to 6 months ago. Amber had been polished and professional in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She had shaken Sarah's hand with a grip that was just a fraction too firm, had looked her up and down with an assessment that was just a fraction too thorough, had said all the right words while communicating through body language and tone that she considered Sarah an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. "Sarah, are you still there?" Catherine's worried voice broke through Sarah's spiraling thoughts. "I'm here," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded distant and strange even to her own ears. "Kate, I need to go. I'll call you later." She hung up before Catherine could respond, before she had to hear more sympathy or concern or pity from yet another person who now knew that Sarah Mitchell's marriage was a sham, that her husband preferred another woman's company to hers, that 22 years of shared history could be erased as easily as a name crossed off a guest list. Sarah walked to the bedroom she shared with Robert, to the king-sized bed with its expensive linens and decorative pillows, to the walk-in closet where his suits hung next to her dresses, to the bathroom where his toiletries sat beside hers in a mockery of domestic harmony. Everything looked the same as it always had, ordinary and familiar, but Sarah saw it all now through different eyes, saw the lie underlying every mundane detail of their shared life. How long had this been going on? How many times had Robert come home to this bed, to this room, to this wife, while thinking about another woman? How many conversations had been lies? How many kisses had been betrayals? How many "I love yous" had been empty words spoken out of habit rather than genuine emotion? She pulled out her laptop and sat down at the small desk in the corner of the bedroom, the same desk where she had spent countless nights working on hotel business while Robert slept a few feet away. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up the hotel's reservation system, typing in the dates of Thomas and Catherine's wedding weekend. The wedding ceremony and reception would take place in the Grand Meridian's ballroom, but Sarah knew that out-of-town guests would need rooms for the weekend. She scanned through the reservations, looking for Robert's name, and there it was, the presidential suite, reserved for Friday and Saturday nights under Robert Mitchell's name. But the reservation showed 2 guests, not 1. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a strange calm settling over her like a blanket over flames. Robert had reserved the most expensive suite in her hotel for his wedding weekend with his mistress, had planned to parade Amber Collins in front of his entire family while his wife stayed home none the wiser, had been arrogant enough or stupid enough to book the room under his own name as if Sarah would never find out, as if she wouldn't have access to her own hotel's reservation system, as if he could conduct his affair literally under her roof and she would remain oblivious. The sheer audacity of it, the breathtaking disrespect, the casual cruelty, left Sarah momentarily speechless. But as she sat there staring at the screen, at the damning evidence of her husband's betrayal displayed in neat rows of data, Sarah felt something shifting inside her. The hurt and shock were still there, sharp and painful and overwhelming. But beneath those emotions, something else was rising, something harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous. Robert had underestimated her, had treated her like a fool, had assumed that because she loved him, she would be easy to deceive. He had forgotten, or perhaps had never truly understood, that the woman he had married was not some helpless victim, was not some passive bystander in her own life. She was Sarah Mitchell, owner and operator of one of the most successful luxury hotels in Boston, a woman who had built an empire through intelligence and determination, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Sarah opened a new browser window and navigated to the hotel's event management system, pulling up all the details of Thomas and Catherine's wedding. She had given them a significant family discount, had blocked off the entire ballroom and committed her best staff to ensuring their day was perfect, had personally overseen every element of the planning with Catherine over the past several months. The wedding was in 3 days, on Saturday afternoon, and according to the timeline, everything was proceeding exactly as scheduled. The flowers had been ordered, the caterer had confirmed the menu, the band had been hired, the cake had been designed. 150 guests would gather in the Grand Meridian's ballroom to celebrate Thomas and Catherine's union, including Robert Mitchell and his guest, Amber Collins. Sarah picked up her phone and called her assistant manager, Derek Chen, a brilliant young man she had hired fresh out of Boston University's hospitality program 5 years ago, and who had proven himself to be not just competent, but exceptional. "Derek, it's Sarah. I need you to pull some information for me." She could hear the surprise in his voice. She rarely called him outside business hours unless there was an emergency. "Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. What do you need?" Sarah took a breath. "The Mitchell-Harper wedding this Saturday. I need you to send me copies of all correspondence, all contracts, all payment records, everything related to that event." There was a brief pause. "Is there a problem with the event? Because everything is confirmed and on track." Catherine Harper called yesterday to confirm final headcount, and she seemed very happy with all the arrangements. Sarah closed her eyes. "No problem with the event itself, Derek. I just need to review some details. Personal reasons." She could hear the curiosity in Derek's silence, but he was too professional to pry. "I'll send everything to your personal email within the hour, Mrs. Mitchell." After hanging up, Sarah went to her home office, a small room off the kitchen that she had converted into a workspace years ago, lined with bookcases and decorated with photographs from various hotel industry awards ceremonies. She booted up her desktop computer and waited for Derek's email to arrive. While she waited, Sarah thought about her marriage, really thought about it for perhaps the first time in years. She had been so focused on building the hotel, on achieving her professional dreams, that she had stopped paying attention to the gradual deterioration of her relationship with Robert. Or maybe, she admitted to herself with brutal honesty, she had noticed but had chosen to ignore it, because acknowledging the problems would have required dealing with them, and she hadn't had the time or energy or emotional bandwidth to take on another massive project. The hotel had consumed her, had demanded everything she had to give, and she had told herself that once it was established, once it was running smoothly, then she would focus on her marriage, then she would make time for Robert, then she would reconnect with the man she had promised to love forever. But it was too late now. Whatever problems had existed in their marriage, whatever communication failures or emotional disconnects or unmet needs had created the distance between them, Robert had chosen to address them by finding another woman rather than by fighting for their relationship. He had taken the easy way out, the coward's way out, and in doing so, he had destroyed the foundation of trust that any marriage required to survive. Sarah could have forgiven many things, could have worked through many problems, But betrayal of this magnitude was something she couldn't overlook, couldn't excuse, couldn't pretend hadn't happened. Derek's email arrived right on schedule, containing dozens of attachments. Sarah opened them methodically, reviewing every document with the same attention to detail she brought to every aspect of hotel management. The contract for the wedding had been signed by Catherine and Thomas, with Sarah listed as the hotel representative. The deposit had been paid from Thomas's account. Subsequent payments had come from various sources, including contributions from Thomas's parents and Catherine's parents, typical for a wedding where multiple families were helping to cover the costs. But then Sarah noticed something interesting in the payment records. A charge of $8,000 for the presidential suite had been put on a credit card, and when Sarah looked at the card details, she recognized the number immediately. It was one of the joint credit cards she shared with Robert. Her husband had charged the room where he planned to stay with his mistress to their shared credit card, using Sarah's money to fund his affair. The audacity of it, the casual assumption that he could get away with it, the complete lack of respect for Sarah or their marriage made her blood boil. She pulled up their credit card statements for the past 6 months and began going through them line by line, looking for other suspicious charges. And there they were, scattered throughout the months like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Expensive dinners at romantic restaurants Sarah had never been to. Charges from a jewelry store for a purchase Sarah had never received. Hotel rooms in nearby cities on weekends when Robert had claimed to be attending work conferences. Flowers from a florist Sarah didn't recognize, sent to an address Sarah didn't know. Sarah did some quick math in her head and estimated that Robert had spent at least $30,000 on his affair over the past 6 months, all of it charged to their joint accounts, all of it funded by Sarah's success, by the hotel she had built, by the business she had sacrificed so much to create. He had been living his double life on her dime, had been courting another woman with Sarah's money, had been planning his grand romantic weekend at Sarah's hotel while spinning lies about Sarah's unavailability. The hypocrisy was staggering, the entitlement was breathtaking, and the sheer stupidity of leaving such an obvious paper trail suggested that Robert had never imagined Sarah would look closely enough to find out. Sarah sat back in her chair and stared at the computer screen, at all the evidence of betrayal displayed in stark black and white numbers and dates. A part of her wanted to confront Robert immediately, wanted to throw the credit card statements in his face and demand explanations and scream about the injustice of it all. But another part of her, the part that had successfully navigated the cutthroat world of luxury hospitality for 2 decades, the part that had learned to think strategically and plan several moves ahead, told her to wait. Confronting Robert now would only give him the opportunity to spin more lies, to make excuses, to try to manipulate the situation to his advantage. No, Sarah decided, she needed to let this play out, needed to let Robert attend that wedding with Amber Collins, needed to let him think he had gotten away with it. And then, when he was least expecting it, when he was at his most vulnerable, she would reveal exactly what she knew and exactly what it was going to cost him. My dear friends, I need to pause here because I know your hearts are racing just like mine is. This story is about to take turns that will absolutely blow your mind, and I promise you the ending is something you'll want to share with everyone you know. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Have you ever discovered that the life you thought you were living was built on lies? Drop your stories in the comments because this is a safe space. A place where we can share our pain and our strength and remind each other that we're never alone. And if someone you love needs to hear this story, please share it with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone know that their pain is valid, that their anger is justified, and that there is life after betrayal. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I've got so many more incredible stories coming your way, stories of survival and strength and women who refuse to stay down. Now, let's get back to Sarah, because you absolutely will not believe what she does next. The next 3 days passed in a strange fog, where Sarah went through the motions of her normal life, while her mind worked constantly on the problem of what to do about Robert. She went to work every morning, held staff meetings, reviewed guest feedback, approved menus, handled the 1,000 small crises that arose in the daily operation of a luxury hotel. She came home every evening, made dinner, watched television with Robert, asked him about his day, Listen to his lies about meetings and deadlines and workplace drama. She slept beside him in their bed, feeling the warmth of his body next to hers, and wondering how it was possible to be so physically close to someone while being emotionally miles apart. Robert seemed completely normal, completely at ease, completely unsuspecting that Sarah knew everything, that his carefully constructed deception had already collapsed. On Friday morning, the day before the wedding, Robert told Sarah he had to work late and wouldn't be home until after midnight. "Big project deadline," he explained, kissing her cheek as he grabbed his briefcase. "I'll probably just grab something to eat at the office. Don't wait up for me." Sarah smiled and nodded, playing the role of the understanding wife for what she knew would be the last time. "Good luck with your project, honey. I'll see you tomorrow." After Robert left, Sarah called Derek at the hotel. "The presidential suite reservation for this weekend, the one under Robert Mitchell's name. Has anyone checked in yet?" "Let me look," Derek replied, and Sarah could hear him typing. "Yes, checked in about 30 minutes ago. Just one guest so far, a woman named Amber Collins." Sarah's jaw clenched. So Amber was already at the hotel, already settling into the suite that Robert had booked with Sarah's money, already making herself comfortable in Sarah's domain. "Derek, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. Can you do that?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Mitchell, if this is about what I think it's about, I just want to say I'm really sorry." Sarah closed her eyes. Of course Derek had figured it out. He was too smart and too familiar with the hotel's operations not to have connected the dots. "I appreciate that, Derek. Now, here's what I need you to do." Sarah spent Friday afternoon preparing. She called her lawyer, Linda Washington, a sharp and ruthless divorce attorney who had handled several high-profile cases and who Sarah knew would fight tooth and nail to protect her interests. Linda listened to Sarah's story without interruption, and when Sarah finished, Linda let out a low whistle. "Sarah, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, but from a legal standpoint, you're in a very strong position. The hotel is your separate property since you owned it before the marriage. The apartment is in your name. The credit card charges to fund an affair establish both adultery and financial misconduct. And Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will consider both the economic and non-economic contributions to the marriage when dividing assets. Given that your income has substantially exceeded his throughout your marriage, and that he's been using marital funds for an extramarital affair, I think we can build a very compelling case." "I want him to have nothing," Sarah said, her voice hard. "I want him to understand what it costs to throw away 22 years of marriage for some marketing consultant he's known for less than a year." Linda's voice was equally hard. "Then that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to draft divorce papers this afternoon. I can have them ready for service on Monday morning." Sarah nodded, even though Linda couldn't see her. "Do it. And Linda, I want you to be there tomorrow at the wedding, as a guest. I'll add you to the guest list. I want you to see everything that happens, to witness it all firsthand, so that when we go to court, there's no question about what Robert did." Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect June day that seemed designed for weddings and celebrations and promises of forever. Sarah dressed carefully, choosing a stunning emerald green dress that she had purchased months ago specifically for this occasion, paired with elegant heels and the diamond earrings her grandmother had left her. She styled her dark hair in soft waves that framed her face, applied makeup with a careful hand that emphasized her cheekbones and her dark eyes, and looked at herself in the mirror with a sense of grim satisfaction. She looked beautiful, successful, confident, everything a woman should be, and she was going to walk into that wedding and show Robert and Amber and everyone else exactly what Robert was throwing away. Sarah arrived at the Grand Meridian at 2 in the afternoon, 3 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She went directly to her office, bypassing the main lobby where wedding preparations were already underway. Derek was waiting for her with a tablet in hand and a concerned expression on his face. "Mrs. Mitchell, everything is set up exactly as you requested. The revised seating chart has been implemented, the security team has been briefed, and I've personally confirmed that all the arrangements are in place. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this?" Sarah looked at her assistant manager, at this young man who had become not just an employee, but a trusted ally, and nodded firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Derek. This is going to be uncomfortable and messy and probably dramatic, but it's necessary. Robert needs to understand that actions have consequences." At 4:30, Sarah made her way down to the ballroom level, using the private elevator that connected her office directly to the event spaces. She could hear the sounds of guests arriving, the murmur of conversation and laughter, the rustle of expensive fabrics, and the click of high heels on marble floors. The ballroom looked spectacular, exactly as she and Catherine had planned, with thousands of white roses and orchids creating an atmosphere of romantic elegance, with candlelight reflecting off crystal and gold accents catching the late afternoon sun streaming through the tall windows. It was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and Sarah felt a pang of genuine happiness for Catherine and Thomas, who deserved this perfect day despite the drama surrounding it. Sarah positioned herself in a small alcove near the entrance to the ballroom, partially hidden by an arrangement of flowers, where she could observe without being immediately noticed. Guests filed in, finding their seats, greeting friends and family, taking photographs and admiring the decorations. Sarah saw Thomas's parents, dignified and proud in their formal attire. She saw Catherine's family, easily identifiable by their matching corsages and boutonnieres. She saw distant relatives and college friends and work colleagues, all dressed in their finest, all gathered to celebrate love and commitment and the promise of a future together. And then she saw Robert. He entered the ballroom at exactly 10 minutes to 5, and he was not alone. Amber Collins walked beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, wearing a dress that was entirely too flashy and too attention-seeking for a wedding guest. A shimmering gold number that probably cost a fortune and that screamed, "Look at me," with every sequin. Robert was smiling, leaning in to whisper something in Amber's ear that made her throw back her head and laugh, a practiced, theatrical laugh that carried across the room. They looked, Sarah thought with bitter clarity, like a couple, like two people who belonged together, like they had every right to be here celebrating as a unit while Robert's actual wife had supposedly been left at home due to work commitments. Sarah watched as Robert guided Amber to their seats, watched as he pulled out her chair with exaggerated gallantry, watched as they settled in side by side at a table prominently positioned near the front of the room. She watched as various family members approached them, greeting Robert with hugs and handshakes, being introduced to Amber with explanations that Sarah couldn't hear but could easily imagine. "This is my colleague Amber. She was kind enough to keep me company since Sarah couldn't make it." More lies, more deception, more casual dismissal of their marriage as if it meant nothing. The ceremony began precisely at 5 o'clock. The wedding party entered to the swell of classical music, bridesmaids in soft pink dresses, followed by groomsmen in elegant tuxedos. And then Catherine appeared at the back of the ballroom, radiant in a gown of ivory lace and silk, her face glowing with happiness as she walked down the aisle on her father's arm. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, watching Catherine's joy, watching the way Thomas's face lit up when he saw his bride, watching two people who genuinely loved each other promise to honor and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. It was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once, a reminder of what marriage was supposed to be, what Sarah's marriage had once been, what had been lost along the way. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, with traditional vows exchanged and rings placed on fingers and a kiss that sealed the union to enthusiastic applause from all the guests. Catherine and Thomas walked back down the aisle together as husband and wife, their faces radiant with happiness, and the guests began moving from their seats to the cocktail hour area while the ballroom was transformed for the reception. Sarah remained in her hidden alcove, watching as Robert and Amber stood and joined the migration to the cocktail hour, watching as Robert placed his hand on the small of Amber's back in a gesture of casual intimacy that made Sarah's stomach turn. Sarah waited until the cocktail hour was well underway before making her move. She could hear the sounds of conversation and music floating down the hallway, could imagine the scene of guests mingling with champagne glasses in hand, sampling hors d'oeuvres and catching up with relatives they hadn't seen in months or years. She straightened her dress, checked her reflection one final time in a nearby mirror, and walked with measured steps toward the gathering. The moment Sarah appeared in the doorway of the cocktail lounge, several things happened at once. Catherine, who had been laughing with a group of bridesmaids, looked up and her eyes went wide with shock and delight. "Sarah!" she exclaimed, breaking away from her group and rushing across the room with her wedding dress billowing behind her. "You're here! You came!" Catherine threw her arms around Sarah in an enthusiastic hug, and Sarah hugged her back, genuinely happy to see the young woman on her special day. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world," Sarah said warmly. "You look absolutely beautiful, Kate." But even as Sarah embraced Catherine, her eyes were scanning the room, finding Robert. He was standing near the bar with Amber at his side, and the expression on his face was one Sarah had never seen before, a mixture of shock and fear and something approaching panic. The color had drained from his face, leaving him pale and shaken, and he was staring at Sarah as if she were a ghost, as if she couldn't possibly be real, as if her presence here was some kind of impossible hallucination. Amber, following Robert's gaze, turned to look at Sarah, and her expression shifted from confusion to understanding to something ugly and defensive in the space of seconds. Catherine was still talking, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. "I don't understand. I thought you had that corporate retreat. That's what Robert said. But you're here. I'm so happy you're here. This means so much to me." Sarah gently extracted herself from Catherine's embrace and smiled at the bride. "There was never any corporate retreat, Kate. That was a misunderstanding. A very significant misunderstanding that I think needs to be cleared up right now." Sarah raised her voice slightly, projecting across the room in the same commanding tone she used when addressing her hotel staff. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment, please." The conversation in the room gradually died down as guests turned to look at Sarah, curiosity evident on their faces. Thomas joined Catherine, putting a protective arm around his new wife's waist, clearly sensing that something dramatic was about to unfold. Sarah took a deep breath and began speaking, her voice clear and steady despite the hammering of her heart. "For those who don't know me, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm Robert Mitchell's wife of 22 years, and I'm also the owner of this hotel where we're all gathered today." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Many of the guests had clearly not known about Sarah's ownership of the Grand Meridian, had not connected the woman whose absence had been explained by work commitments with the successful businesswoman who owned one of Boston's premier luxury hotels. Sarah continued, her eyes moving around the room, making contact with various guests, but always returning to Robert, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I was told by several people that I couldn't attend this wedding because of work commitments, because of some important corporate event that I supposedly couldn't delegate. I want to assure everyone here that was never true. I cleared my schedule months ago, specifically to be here for Catherine and Thomas's special day." Dorothy Mitchell, Robert's mother, pushed her way forward through the crowd, her face flushed with anger or embarrassment, or both. "Sarah, this is hardly the time or place for whatever point you're trying to make. This is Thomas and Catherine's wedding day, and you're making a scene." Sarah turned to face her mother-in-law, and when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. "You're absolutely right, Dorothy. This is Thomas and Catherine's wedding day, which is why I'm here, where I was always supposed to be, where I would have been if my husband hadn't deliberately removed my name from the guest list and told your entire family that I was too busy working to attend." The gasps from the crowd were audible now, and Sarah could see the confusion and dawning comprehension on faces throughout the room. Thomas spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Robert, what is she talking about? You said Sarah had a work commitment. You said she sent her apologies." Robert opened his mouth, but no words came out, and in that moment of silence, Amber Collins made the catastrophic mistake of trying to defend him. "This is ridiculous," Amber said, her voice sharp and defensive. "Robert told us all the truth about his workaholic wife who can't even make time for family events. Maybe instead of embarrassing him publicly, you should look at your own behavior and why your husband needs to find companionship elsewhere." The room went absolutely silent, that terrible kind of silence that follows a revelation that changes everything. Sarah smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Companionship elsewhere. What an interesting way to describe an affair. Tell me, Amber, does your husband know where you are right now? Does he know that you checked into the presidential suite of this hotel yesterday afternoon? A suite that my husband booked using our joint credit card? Does he know that you've been sleeping with Robert for the past year while playing the role of concerned colleague? Amber's face went from flushed to pale in seconds, and Robert finally found his voice. "Sarah, please, let's discuss this privately. This isn't the place." Sarah laughed, and it was a harsh sound that held no humor. "Private? You wanted privacy when you were conducting your affair in restaurants and hotels all over Boston? You wanted privacy when you booked a romantic weekend in my hotel with my money? You wanted privacy when you removed my name from this guest list so you could parade your mistress in front of your entire family? No, Robert, I think we're well past privacy now." Catherine had tears streaming down her face, and Thomas looked furious, his jaw clenched tight. Dorothy Mitchell looked like she might faint, one hand pressed to her chest, her earlier defense of her son completely abandoned in the face of this public revelation. Sarah turned to address the room at large. "I want to apologize to Catherine and Thomas for bringing this drama to your wedding day. You both deserve better. But I also want you to know that I'm not leaving because Catherine specifically asked me to be here, and I care about her far too much to let Robert's lies keep me away. However, what I am doing is asking Robert Mitchell and Amber Collins to leave this hotel immediately." Robert took a step forward, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "You can't throw me out of my own brother's wedding. This is family." Sarah's smile was cold. "Actually, I can, because this is my hotel, Robert. My property, my business, my rules. And I'm exercising my right as owner to refuse service to anyone who has demonstrated such blatant disrespect for this establishment and its proprietor. Security will escort you both out. Your belongings have already been removed from the presidential suite and are waiting for you at the front desk." As if on cue, 2 members of the hotel's security team appeared in the doorway, professional and unobtrusive, but clearly ready to enforce Sarah's directive. Robert looked around the room desperately, seeking support or sympathy or intervention, but finding only shocked faces and averted eyes. Even his own mother wouldn't meet his gaze, too horrified by his behavior to offer any defense. Amber, realizing the situation was beyond salvaging, turned and walked quickly toward the exit, her gold dress glittering mockingly in the light. Robert followed, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and as he passed Sarah, he stopped and whispered, "I never meant for it to happen like this." Sarah looked at her husband, at this man she had loved for more than 2 decades, at this stranger who had betrayed her so completely, and felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. "You never meant for me to find out, you mean? That's not the same thing, Robert. That's not even close." He left without another word, and Sarah watched him go, watched 22 years of marriage walk out the door, and felt oddly free, as if some tremendous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The silence in the room stretched for several long seconds, before Catherine rushed forward and took Sarah's hands in hers. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I had known, we never would have." Sarah squeezed Catherine's hands gently. "You have nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. Robert made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences. But this is your wedding day, and I will not let him ruin it. So let's all take a deep breath, have another glass of champagne, and remember that we're here to celebrate you and Thomas and the beautiful life you're building together." Thomas stepped forward and extended his hand to Sarah, and when she took it, he pulled her into a warm hug. "Thank you for being here, Sarah, and thank you for handling that with such grace and dignity. Robert's my brother, but what he did was inexcusable. You deserved so much better." Sarah returned the hug, grateful for Thomas's support, grateful that at least one member of the Mitchell family had the decency to acknowledge the magnitude of Robert's betrayal. "You're a good man, Thomas. Catherine is lucky to have you." The reception proceeded, and after the initial shock wore off, the guests seemed to collectively decide to follow Sarah's lead and focus on celebrating the happy couple rather than dwelling on the drama. Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers, by Robert's relatives who apologized for his behavior and expressed their admiration for how she had handled the situation, by strangers who introduced themselves and complimented the hotel and told her how impressive it was that she owned such a magnificent property. Dorothy Mitchell approached late in the evening, her eyes red from crying, and took Sarah's hand. "I owe you an apology that goes far beyond today," Dorothy said quietly. "I never appreciated you, never valued what you brought to our family. never acknowledged how much you did for all of us. I let my own narrow-minded views of what a wife should be blind me to the remarkable woman my son married. And now he's lost you, and it's partly my fault for not teaching him better." Sarah looked at her mother-in-law and saw genuine remorse, genuine regret, genuine recognition of the mistakes that had been made. "Thank you for saying that, Dorothy. It means more than you know. But Robert's choices are his own. He's an adult, and he made decisions that destroyed our marriage. That's on him, not on you." Dorothy nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Will you ever be able to forgive him? Forgive us?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know about forgiveness, Dorothy. That's something that takes time, if it comes at all. But I do know that I'm done letting other people's actions dictate my happiness. I'm done making myself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurities. I'm done apologizing for my success or my ambition or my strength. From this moment forward, I'm living my life on my own terms." The evening wound down eventually, with Catherine and Thomas departing for their honeymoon suite upstairs amid a shower of rose petals and good wishes. As the last guests trickled out and the staff began the cleanup process, Sarah stood in the empty ballroom, looking at the remnants of the celebration, the scattered rose petals and empty champagne glasses and flickering candles. Derek appeared at her elbow, tablet in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, if you need anything at all, I'm here. And I just want to say that what you did tonight took incredible courage." Sarah smiled at him, genuinely grateful for his support. "Thank you, Derek. I couldn't have pulled this off without you." Sarah went up to her office and sat at her desk, looking out the window at the Boston skyline glittering in the darkness. Her phone had been buzzing all evening with messages and calls, and she finally took it out to look at what had accumulated. There were several messages from Linda Washington, her lawyer, confirming that she had witnessed everything and that they had an airtight case for the divorce proceedings. There were messages from friends expressing their support and outrage on her behalf. There were even messages from business contacts who had heard about what happened and wanted to express their admiration for how she had handled the situation. And there was one message from Robert, sent an hour ago. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I made terrible mistakes. I hurt you in ways that can never be undone. I destroyed something beautiful because of my own weakness and selfishness. I don't expect you to take me back. Don't expect anything from you except maybe the chance to eventually explain, to try to make you understand why I did what I did. I know those are just words, and words mean nothing after what I've done, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my life." Sarah read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. She didn't owe Robert explanations or forgiveness or closure or anything else. She had given him 22 years of her life, her love, her loyalty, her support, and he had thrown it all away for a woman who had abandoned him the moment things got difficult. The consequences of his choices were his to bear, not hers to ease. 3 months later, Sarah sat in her lawyer's office as Linda Washington reviewed the final divorce settlement. Robert had tried to fight for a portion of the hotel's value, had argued that his emotional support during the building years entitled him to compensation. But the judge had been unimpressed with his arguments, particularly in light of the documented affair and the misuse of marital funds. In the end, Robert received nothing except the obligation to pay Sarah back for the money he had spent on Amber Collins, payments that would come out of his salary for years to come. The apartment remained Sarah's, the hotel remained Sarah's, and their joint savings were split evenly, which, given Sarah's substantially higher earnings, meant that Robert's portion was disappointingly small. Sarah signed the final documents with a sense of relief and freedom that surprised her with its intensity. She had been married for 22 years, had built her entire adult life around the assumption that she and Robert would grow old together. And now that was over, finished, dissolved with the stroke of a pen. But instead of feeling sad or lost or afraid, Sarah felt liberated, as if she had been carrying a burden she hadn't even realized was there until it was lifted. She was free to live her life without worrying about making someone else feel inadequate, without dimming her own light to make someone else comfortable, without sacrificing her dreams to accommodate someone else's ego. Today, 5 years after that dramatic wedding, Sarah's life looks nothing like she imagined it would, and it's better in almost every way. The Grand Meridian Hotel continues to thrive, consistently ranked among the top luxury hotels not just in Boston, but in the entire Northeast. Sarah opened a second property in New York City 3 years ago, and plans are underway for a third location in Charleston. She's been featured in Forbes and Fortune and hospitality industry publications around the world, recognized as one of the most successful female entrepreneurs in her field. She's dating someone new, a wonderful man named James, who is a partner at an architectural firm and who celebrates her successes instead of feeling threatened by them, who encourages her ambitions instead of trying to contain them, who sees her strength as something to admire rather than something to fear. They take things slowly, both of them having learned from past mistakes, both of them committed to building something healthy and balanced and real. Catherine and Thomas are still happily married, parents now to a beautiful baby girl named Hope, after Sarah's grandmother. Sarah is the child's godmother and one of Catherine's closest friends, their bond strengthened rather than weakened by the dramatic events at the wedding. They have lunch together at least once a month, and Catherine never fails to thank Sarah for showing her what real strength looks like, what it means to refuse to be diminished by someone else's failures. Robert, Sarah has heard through the family grapevine, is not doing as well. Amber Collins returned to her husband, leaving Robert alone and embarrassed. He lost his job shortly after the divorce, his reputation tarnished by the very public nature of his affair and its exposure. He's working now in a much less prestigious position for a much smaller salary, living in a modest apartment in a less desirable neighborhood, struggling to make his monthly payments to Sarah. His family maintains a relationship with him because family is family, but things are strained, difficult, marked by disappointment and disapproval. Sarah occasionally wonders if she should feel bad for him, if there's some obligation to pity the man who once shared her life. But mostly, she feels nothing. That strange emotional neutrality that comes when someone who once mattered intensely becomes just another person in the world, someone whose choices and consequences no longer have any power to affect her happiness. She wishes him no harm, but she also doesn't wish him well. He simply exists in a space outside her concern, outside her emotional landscape, outside the life she's built for herself. Looking back on that night at the wedding, Sarah recognizes it as the turning point, the moment when she stopped allowing other people to write her story and took control of the narrative herself. It would have been easy to stay quiet, to confront Robert privately, to handle the whole situation with the kind of discretion that society expects from women dealing with betrayal. But Sarah had chosen a different path, had chosen visibility and honesty, and the public assertion of her own worth and dignity. Some people had criticized her for making a scene, for ruining a family event, for handling her marital problems in such a public forum. But far more people had reached out to thank her, to tell her that seeing her refuse to be humiliated had given them courage in their own lives, had inspired them to stand up for themselves in situations where they had previously stayed silent. Sarah's story is ultimately not about revenge, though there's certainly satisfaction in how things turned out for Robert. It's about self-respect, about refusing to accept treatment that diminishes your humanity, about understanding that love without respect is not really love at all. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who cannot or will not value you properly. It's about building something beautiful and lasting and meaningful, whether that's a business or a life or a sense of self-worth that nobody else can touch or tarnish or take away. When people ask Sarah what she learned from her marriage and its spectacular ending, she always gives the same answer. I learned that my success is not something to apologize for, that my strength is not something to hide, that my ambition is not something to be ashamed of. I learned that the right person will celebrate those things, not resent them. I learned that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who makes you feel small. And I learned that the best revenge isn't hurting the person who hurt you. The best revenge is living so well, so fully, so completely in your truth, that their opinion of you becomes utterly irrelevant. Sarah Mitchell stands in her office today, looking out at the city she loves, at the business she built, at the life she created through determination and hard work, and an absolute refusal to accept anything less than what she deserves. She is 50 years old, successful beyond her wildest dreams, surrounded by people who love and respect her, and profoundly, joyfully, triumphantly happy. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when she reflects on the journey that brought her here, she thinks about that wedding invitation with its cruel omission of her name, and she smiles. Because that invitation, meant to exclude her, to erase her, to make her invisible, had instead become the catalyst for the most profound transformation of her life. It had forced her to see clearly what she had been avoiding, to act decisively when action was required, to choose herself when choosing herself felt impossible. And in the end, choosing herself had been the best decision she ever made.